Years.
Well, let's back up a little bit and see how all of this stuff came to be. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Canada. What were your parents like? You mentioned before we came on air that you grew up in an artistic environment. What was that experience like?
I started off as a toddler homesteading in northern Canada. My father had been a prisoner of war in Europe for 5 years, and he basically fled Europe after that and decided to hide away. And we lived on a farm until I was about 10 years old. My brother and sister, who were both older, were getting into writing and graphic arts, and so when we moved to southern Canada, I was basically raised in a very artistic environment. Spent a lot of time hanging around other people's galleries and studios, and one thing I did discover is that if you have an artist's concept, if you have, call it the CAD image in your head, that you can make anything out of anything, because that's what sculptors do. Sculptors are not intimidated by the idea of, you know, you want to make this out of concrete, you want to make this out of wood, you want to make this out of plastic, you want to make anything out of anything. That's the challenge that sculptors actually thrive on. So the idea that you could make machinery out of concrete for me was perfectly normal, because that's what sculptors would do.
Now, why did you join CUSO?
CUSO is the Canadian kind of equivalent of Peace Corps. And I had come out of university and I wanted to see the world, I wanted to do some traveling. And I got a chance to go to Jamaica, where I taught high school in the worst slum probably in the Western Hemisphere, Trenchtown in West Kingston, Jamaica. And I came out of that pretty depressed and pretty politicized, because it was an area of unspeakable poverty and violence and complete hopelessness. And after 2 years of having really not accomplished very much, I kind of came out and I was looking for something bigger and something better. And I discovered Oxfam, and I discovered the Nigerian Civil War, and I was feeling kind of militant and pretty invincible at the time. So I went off to I didn't join the Nigerian Civil War. I worked in emergency feeding situations there. Every night we'd get on a big plane loaded with food, fly into a rebel enclave, land on a 3-lane highway with people flying overhead, dropping bombs on us, unload the food, and come back out. And that was kind of over the edge in the other direction. It was, you know, Trenchtown was weird and hopeless, but to be on the losing side of a war where 10,000 people a day are dying of starvation didn't do a lot for my mental health. So I just said, to heck with it, I'm going to go back home, I'm going to be a movie maker, I'm going to, you know, hang around fancy bars and meet pretty women, and to heck with this whole business of doing something in the world. And
at the end of that tour, you actually met Kurt Vonnegut, is that correct?
I met Kurt Vonnegut when the sun would rise it was Biafra, which was this rebel enclave. That was a very dangerous time, because the bombers would come over and the fighters would come over and destroy anything that was still on the ground. So we would always have to get our plane off the ground and out before then. And wandering, as the sun was just rising, wandering out of the bush came a guy who was obviously Kurt Vonnegut. And he asked if we were flying to Cameroon, and we said no, we were going to the Portuguese prison colony. And he said, well, I guess it's better than being here all day long. Let me hitch a ride. And we sat in the back of a very noisy plane, kind of staring at each other, because it was a pretty overwhelming experience to be in that desperate a situation. And at the end, when we parted company, we kind of made a little light humor about, well, someone should write a book about this. And I said, but given the situation, it's probably going to be you. And I think he said, whoever writes the book first sends it to the other and wins. So I just want to point out for all of you that I actually wrote the book, and I won, and I sent a copy to Kurt Vonnegut, and his agent sent me a nice thank you letter back, but I didn't get anything back.
Tell us about the ship's cat. What is the ship's cat about?
When we flew back and forth, we would fly food in, and we would fly a few particularly desperately dying babies out where they would be taken care of by some Austrian nuns in a hospital. And it was kind of a futile gesture because literally thousands and thousands of people would die every day, and we would save 25 of them. And women would run up to our airplane at night on the runway holding their children, basically trying to give us their babies. And we would always turn them away, and at one point going back I realized we had one extra child who was considerably healthier and much better condition on the plane, and obviously this woman had gotten this baby on the plane. But the Portuguese who were our so-called hosts were very careful about the paperwork on these babies, so we had one more baby than we had paperwork for. So we kept this child in our mechanic's shed, and he actually spoke English. He was an Igbo and he spoke English, and he became our pet, and for months we just kind of kept him there and fed him there, and we started teaching him school stuff, and he had obviously been told not to give his name because then he could be returned. And at the end, when the war was over and we had lost and we were about to leave, there was this whole thing, what do we do with our kid? And I was going to simply bring him back to Canada. I was going to kind of hide him in my luggage and take him back. I was going to adopt him, and at the last minute the Red Cross came through looking for leftover orphans or whatever, and they picked him up and took him away. But it was a fictional idea of what would have happened if a young mechanic had taken this baby back to Canada and had raised him. And in the end, it's basically the story is that the airplane mechanic saves the child, but in the end the child saves the aircraft mechanic. So the question is, who saves who? It's a fabulous book and it's available online.
Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is Jock Brandis, and we're talking about the book, The Ship's Cat, as well as this nonprofit organization, the Full Belly Project. I think there's a website URL for that. There is.
It's fullbellyproject.org, and it's a great way to keep track of us because we've got a lot of new things, a lot of new programs. We're going into new countries all the time. There's great stories. There's, it's if you're interested in what to do and how to get involved, it's fullbellyproject.org.
Now, after your tenure with Oxfam International and seeing some of the plight of the Nigerians and realizing, okay, this is was it just a dead-end situation? Was it just hopeless?
It was completely hopeless, and you got to realize I left Africa in the middle of the night under a hail of machine gun fire and bombs, and just basically got out with my life. And I swore I would never, ever, ever go back. So when I got this invitation to go to Mali and help these people with their water system, I thought, oh well. Then a whole bunch of kind of stuff started coming back in my mind. But when I arrived in Mali, it was paradise. It was beautiful little village with mud huts and happy, healthy people, and it was the complete and polar opposite of the Africa that I had seen before. And you've got to realize I never even saw Africa in daylight because I was only there at night. We would fly out. So my image of Africa was it was always dark and it was always full of dying people. And gunfire and unspeakable instant violence, and so to see that Africa could be paradise completely changed my mind about it and got me back to thinking about the things I had thought about before.
Now, recently CNN has been doing a special on you, correct? What is that about?
They do this thing called the CNN Hero. And they've picked me out to be one of these CNN heroes, and they do a small segment where they've got film footage of me working in Haiti and working in Africa, working in my shop and talking a bit. And I guess they're going to be running it on CNN Headline News and the regular CNN network and actually around the world. So we expect to get another inundation of requests for this kind of technology because it shows us doing not just peanuts, but jatropha and shea and coffee and a lot of these things.
And a lot of that is the development that has come about as a result of the Full Belly Project, correct?
The mission of the Full Belly Project is to try and create better living and better economics for the very poorest people in the world. And the very poorest people in the world are farmers. And a lot of them are very poor because they raise a product in their fields and their orchards, and they sell the product for virtually no money, and the real value added comes in the hands of the processor. The guy who husks the coffee and dries it and puts it in a bag and sells it, he's the guy who gets rich off coffee, but the guy growing the coffee gets nothing. It's the same with peanuts, it's the same with shea. It's a lot of these crops, and we are developing a series of machines that can be either hand operated like this or pedal powered. There's 8 times more strength in 2 human legs than 1 arm. So if you want to really get a lot of work done, you need to have a pedal powered machine. But the end purpose of this is that villages and village cooperatives can get one of these machines and suddenly improve their output amazingly and improve their economic possibilities.
Well, if you're just tuning in, the guest is Jock Brandis. We've been talking a little bit about his nonprofit organization, the Full Belly Project. They have a website, fullbellyproject.org.